Today, we will hear from foundational Black Americans responding to the news of the denial of Ghana's request for reparations from the United Nations. Check it out.
In addition to its obvious legal problems, this resolution is also unclear as to who the recipients of reparatory justice would be. The drafters and supporters of this resolution seem to believe it is them. The United States strongly objects to the cynical usage of historical wrongs as a leverage point in an attempt to reallocate modern resources to people and nations who are distantly related to the historical victims. For these reasons, the United States will vote no on this resolution. Thank you.
Now, I didn't do a whole lot of research. I read a couple of articles, and I gather from those articles that I read is the text of the resolution basically frames slavery as a historical atrocity, which it was. And the consequences still shape racial inequality, discrimination. It still affecting the global systems, labor, property, capital. It explicitly says reparations are a concrete step towards correcting the wrongs of the transatlantic slave trade. Furthermore, from what I gathered, from what I read, the resolution doesn't provide any type of legal payout. All it does, it mainly is about official recognition, recognizing that the transatlantic slave trade is the gravest atrocity against humanity in history. It encourages governments to apologize. But when it comes to talking about who's going to get compensated, how much will people get compensated, when will people get compensated, there's no discussion about that in the resolution. You had 123 countries vote for the resolution. You had 3 who voted against the resolution. Those 3 are Argentina, Israel, and the United States. And you had 52 countries abstain. They didn't vote for, and they didn't vote against. And here's the conversation that I'm seeing that's taking place out on social media regarding the passing of this resolution. You have people celebrating. You have people out in the diaspora, across the diaspora, people over in Ghana because, their president brought the resolution to the UN and it passed, so they're celebrating. You don't see a lot of Black Americans talking about this or celebrating this. I can't speak for all Black Americans, so I'm going to speak for myself. I recognize that on some level this is a win, right? Like the president of Ghana said, this resolution will safeguard against forgetting the atrocities of the transatlantic slave trade, right? We know here in the United States, they are working hard to try to whitewash slavery here in the United States. So this resolution does help to safeguard that, but it doesn't go beyond that. It recommends that governments apologize for slavery. It recommends that governments apologize for slavery. Are there any consequences for governments not apologizing for slavery? No. It's the first step to talk about reparative justice. Well, what are the follow-up steps? The resolution doesn't talk about follow-up steps. Are there meetings being scheduled in the future to keep this going, to keep this discussion going? And when it comes to reparations, what does that look like? The reparations, it's not talked about in the resolution. It doesn't say reparations could look like checks cut. It could look like 40 acres and a mule. It could look like free education. It could look like, it doesn't specifically talk about reparations and what that looks like across the world. But I understand why Ghana is celebrating. They are proud of their president. And as a Black American, and in knowing that African countries has done nothing for Black Americans, I don't trust that African countries, including Ghana, would do anything regarding this resolution to benefit Black Americans. So, does it deserve to be celebrated? Absolutely. Am I celebrating? No, I am not.
123 countries voted yes, and 3 voted no. Today, the UN adopted a resolution declaring the transatlantic slave trade the gravest crimes against humanity and calling for reparations to the descendants of enslaved Africans and those affected by the transatlantic slave trade. That would be me. They said the gravest crimes against humanity recorded in history, and 3 countries voted no. The United States is not real, and Argentina. Now, I need you to sit with that for just a moment, because those 3 countries voting no, they didn't just vote no on reparations today, okay? These are the same 3 governments currently dismantling every institution, every policy, and every framework designed to name white supremacy and address it. And that is not a coincidence. Under this administration, the United States has gutted DEI, eliminated diversity offices all across the federal government, defunded the programs tracking racial inequity, and on the UN floor today, the U.S. ambassador said the quiet part out loud, saying we do not recognize a legal right to reparations for historical wrongs that were not illegal under international law at the time. Let me translate that. Enslaving millions of African people, millions of human beings, was not a crime then, so no debt owed, no accountability need be taken. Argentina. Javier Milei, who has already been called the Trump of South America, shut down Argentina's National Institute Against Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Racism in his first year in office. He called it a sinister body used for ideological persecution. And baby, Argentina has an extensive history of racist ideology built on the notion of European supremacy. The belief that Argentina was built by European immigrants, and they believe that Africans, Latinos, and indigenous cultural influences are irrelevant, and in fact, undesirable. So yeah, Argentina voted no, but honestly, did we expect anything else? And then we got Is Not Real, engaged in a military campaign that is right now under examination for genocide. A baby-ass country who is demanding that the entire world recognize its historical trauma while denying and refusing to recognize the historical trauma of Black people. Yuck! So 123 countries said, you know what, this happened. It was a crime, it was horrific, and a debt needs to be paid. And 3 countries said, we don't owe you shit. But those are just the 3 countries that said it out loud. Because I peeped the 52 others that didn't vote yes, so you might as well have voted no, because why not? But anyway, the resolution has been adopted, and today is a historical day. And not because of a white man who claims to be part of the Cherokee Nation being sworn in as DHS Secretary.
The United States obviously voted no to Ghana's reparations resolution that they presented to the UN. And I don't know what was in the full docket, but I guess it made it seem like slavery was kind of an atrocity of, I guess the Americas or maybe the United States between just the 15th and the 19th century. And what they were saying was slavery started before the 15th century, and it continued after the 19th century. So basically, they came in to a business operation that was already going on. Ghana was already, it wasn't even established as Ghana, but that region of West Africa was already engaged in slave trading. So for them to ask for reparations, it's like, how are you gonna ask for reparations for an operation that you were involved in and continue to this day to still be involved in? It's still slave trading going on, not just in West Africa, but North Africa, other parts of Africa. So it just doesn't, it's just like, come on now, it doesn't add up, doesn't even make sense. And then my thing is, y'all weren't even the actual victims of it. The victims were the people who were actually trafficked from that area and brought to the Americas. The descendants of those people would be the ones who would be owed the reparations, not the people that sold them into it or who was doing business with the colonizers to sell them into it. And then another thing is that if America was to give reparations to Africa, right, the problem with that, another on top of all the problems, would be, technically, you already know how this would go. It would fall on the taxpayers, aka us, including Black Americans. Our taxes would skyrocket, and basically we would end up paying reparations to Africa for selling our ancestors into slavery. So it's kind of like double dipping. So the victims, the descendants of the victims will end up paying the people that sold them into misery as reparations. Like, because you know that's how it would go. It wouldn't be the government paying for it. It would be the average everyday citizen paying for it, including us. So we would end up paying them for reparations for the atrocity that they were involved in. Makes absolutely no sense.
Ooh, peace. Because once again, it's on. Let's see what got FBA aggravated today, my lord. UN votes to recognize slavery as the gravest crime against humanity, my lord. Ghana pushes UN to back reparations to historic slave trade. It's time for the UN to formally recognize the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity. Ghana pushes UN resolution to recognize slave trade as a crime against humanity. You get the point. Now, before we get all aggravated like we usually do, my lord, because I know we have a problem with Ghana speaking up on Black Americans' behalf, or that's how it seems to be, even though they are in the landmass where it was the center for the transatlantic slave trade and it was also affected. But that ain't the point that I'm getting at. Anytime that we mad at another group speaking up for us, we should look at our own disorganization and say, Ghana is a nation and their government is speaking up for this issue. Where is our government? Umar ain't our head of state. Tariq ain't our head of state. Farrakhan ain't our head of state. None of the Moors are our head of states. We don't have a head of state. We don't have no senators. We don't have a parliament. We don't have a government. We need a government. A people that is a nation supposed to have a government, borders, military, currency. Think nation. Furthermore, this is empty symbolism at this point because the UN already designated the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity. My lord, let's examine the file. The Durban Declaration and Program of Action, DDPA, adopted at the UN World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa in 2001, explicitly recognized that slavery and the slave trade, including the transatlantic slave trade, are a crime against humanity and should always have been so. Now, if we're looking at it from a political landscape, it could be a play for Ghana and America, the United States of America, to finally do away with the reparations argument, meaning they can give Ghana trinkets, a small amount of funds or whatever, cut out some of their foreign aid and say, yeah, we paid reparations, so Black Americans, y'all have no gripe against us anymore. Furthermore, it should always point back to our own disorganization because nobody can speak up for us if we're well organized. Think nation. It's peace if it's peace. Also, it's been Black Americans working to get reparations for us for the longest. And Cobra is one group, whether you agree with them or not, that's been at the forefront of that battle for the longest. The National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, in Cobra. My lord, you see that 87. And let's keep it 1,000. Even before in Cobra, Republic of New Africa was fighting for reparations way back in the 60s, my lord. And they are the founders of in Cobra. Let's examine the file. See that? National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. Mario Bedelli, Chokwe Lumumba, founders. Amari Abubakari Obadili, a matter of war. Amari Obadili, all enslavement in the 13 colonies in the United States, the Republic of New Africa, and reparations. Yeah. And he was a lawyer. Put some respect on his name, my Lord. Peace to the God.
Oh, this wasn't on the news. To my knowledge, this was not on the news. You let me know if you saw this on the news yesterday. Okay, so yesterday, the United Nations met, and there was a vote that was taken, spearheaded by Ghana's president. And thank you, Ghana. The UN is urging reparations for slavery's historical wrongs. And they took a vote whether or not to name the transatlantic slave trade as the worst crime amongst humanity. After the vote was taken, it was huge applause. Look it up. There were 123 countries in favor of naming slavery as the worst crime amongst humanity. There were 52 countries that abstained from voting. That's, in my opinion, a no vote, because why would you abstain? There were 3 countries that said no, it wasn't. Guess who the 3 countries were? And I'll show you the vote at the end of this talk. But my point is, when you see the countries and you see how they voted, stop spending money. Stop traveling to these countries and putting money into their economy. I had to tell my cousin yesterday, him and his family, I found out, went on a vacation to Florida. And I was like, why would you go there? And he was like, I don't like their politics, but I like Florida. I said, make that make sense, because you just put money into their economy. Ghana's president, and I'm going to read, quote, started the vote by saying, today we come together in solemn solidarity to affirm truth and pursue a route to healing and reparative justice. That's an important statement right there, because for those white people who wonder why we can't move on, because it wasn't acknowledged properly. The accountability was not taken properly. He goes on to say, for more than 400 years, millions of people were stolen from Africa, put in shackles, and shipped to the New World to toil in cotton fields and sugar and coffee plantations under scorching heat and the crack of a whip. Now, I'm not going to compare one tragedy amongst an ethnicity against the other. I'm not downplaying the Holocaust. I'm not downplaying the land stolen from Native Americans, because they all have a bad stain on history. Getting back to the 3 that said no, which ones do you think? Israel, Argentina, and the United States. No surprise there. Let me read what the representative from the United States said. Dan Negria said, and I quote, the text was highly problematic in countless respects. He regretted that Washington must once again remind this body that the United Nations exists to maintain international peace and security, and was not founded to advance narrow specific interests and agendas, to establish niche international days, nor to create new costly meeting and reporting mandates. The hypocrisy is unreal. He went on to say, furthermore, the U.S. does not recognize a legal right to reparations for historical wrongs that were not illegal under international law at the time they occurred. Everyone has gotten a bit of justice other than African Americans. And I'm not saying that justice makes up for things, but the Jewish people got reparations for the Holocaust. Native Americans can attend universities and schools free, and they get some other monetary things. I'm not saying that suffices. African Americans has got nothing but continuous racism. Even the UN secretary, and I quote, said, "Now we must remove the persistent barriers that prevent so many people of African descent from exercising their right and realizing their potential." He went on to urge countries to drive action to eradicate systematic racism. So while other countries will be working to eradicate, what's the United States doing? Well, we see what they're doing. And I want other ethnicities to think about this. The countries where enslaved Africans were taken from also suffered a hollowing out, lost generations who potentially could have helped that country to prosper. This is why so much of there is a breakdown in our family structure. Don't spend your tax dollars in these countries.
So let's talk about this reparations thing, because a lot of people don't understand why people were upset when the guy from Ghana came over. Was it the president? And he laid wreaths down at a memorial for Black American forefathers. Okay? Now, so this whole reparations thing, okay, is a lot of people feel like Africa, the African Union, different countries in Africa, particularly on the West Coast, should not tie themselves to Black American reparations for many reasons. Number one, the nature of the injury is not the same. Okay, the nature of the injury is not the same, and the remedy isn't going to be the same. That's just the bottom line. So let's say, for instance, the United States. Let's say colonization. Well, Africa was colonized. Yeah, they were colonized, but they weren't colonized by the United States. The only particular place that was quote unquote, you could say, colonized by the U.S. was Liberia, but that wasn't the same type of colonization at all. It definitely wasn't. It was the American Colonial Society going over there, making an actual deal with the indigenous people in that area at the time, and they said, yeah, y'all can relocate free Black Americans and Caribbean people over there, and they can live over here. That's what that was. It wasn't the colonization that took place across Africa from countries like Germany, France, and all those other places. Okay, in Europe. Okay, so that's number one. But number two is the fact that, like, everyone knows that many African leaders in West Africa helped set up the transatlantic slave trade. Everybody knows that, right? So that's and we don't need to go into it. It's just the truth. Many of them helped set up the transatlantic slave trade and participated in it and got what they wanted out of it. Whether they got wealthy or not off of it is one thing, but it was a trade. That's the key word, trade. Okay, and that's where the point of no return comes in. Is that my forefathers were cut off, meaning they didn't want us no more. Okay, so it looks like now this repair the damage thing. You really can't repair that damage. Not in that sense. Like I said, because the nature of the injury is different. Okay. Whereas during colonization, first off, colonization did not last nearly as long as the transatlantic slave trade or slavery in the United States of America and oppression in the United States of America to Black Americans. Period. It didn't. In the United States of America, that thing lasted, we're going to say, from 16th century all the way through Jim Crow. Okay. That's not colonization. Colonization of Africa did not start. No, it's totally different. It's totally different. That whole breakup of the continent, and that whole takeover, that whole bum rush of the continent didn't happen until way later, after the slave trade was over. Okay, it didn't last for centuries. So, like I said before, the nature of the injury is different. So, and that's why people are offended, because it's like, wait a minute, why are you trying to take what belongs to specifically Black Americans and say you want to split up what Black Americans were getting reparations? You want to split it up throughout the whole of Africa, and that's not cool. That's really not cool, because then what will that do? That will actually take from Black America what belongs to Black America, and that honestly belongs to Black America. And here's another thing I just thought about: while several other places continue to need, I'm gonna say quote unquote need, African enslaved directly from the continent, that wasn't the case for the United States of America. Okay, that was not the case. We were what do they call it? We were involved in what was called the Second Middle Passage. That was within the United States of America, because they'd already, how am I gonna say this? The United States wasn't constantly at that particular time. There was a point, I believe it was the early 1800s. They weren't bringing in loads of African people into the United States of America directly from the continent. That was more happening in the Caribbean and in Brazil. Okay, that's documented fact. We were reproducing here in the United States. Period. And that's where that second trade thing I was talking about. Because not only, and you would have to go into, I'm not going into the history of the United States of America, and that has a lot to do with that one drop rule too. Okay, because we were all black based off of one drop rule. It wasn't based off of people coming from Africa. If you follow what I'm saying, it wasn't based off that. Okay, we had generations. Our generations had survived in the United States of America, where a lot of in the Caribbean and in Brazil, they had to keep getting enslaved from Africa longer because a lot of them were dying. It was very brutal, far more brutal conditions down there. Okay, so there are a lot of reasons why it's not understood why Africa or especially West Africa will continue to latch itself to Black America in that sense of reparations. Because what happened in the United States of America, as far as oppression and everything else, had nothing to do with the continent of Africa. Not saying Africa does not deserve reparations, but they deserve it more from Europe, based on whatever happened during colonization over there. To say that, okay, we're gonna just go ahead and make everybody get, then that means everybody get nothing. That's what it looks like to me. If everybody want to get the same thing from the same people, that means everybody's gonna get nothing. Because and I'm gonna say this too. Some of the larger ethnic groups in Africa today are the ones that benefited back then, which is why they're the larger ones today. From the and I'm gonna say this like this, because the larger tribes on the continent of Africa during the transatlantic slave trade were the ones pillaging and taking the lives of other smaller tribes and absorbing them into their own tribe, or sending them off in the transatlantic slave trade. So a lot of Black Americans, as well as Caribbean and others, would not ever know who their ancient forefathers actually were because of the absorption. So basically, taking reparations from Black Americans and then basically rewarding those who took the lives of our ancient forefathers, right? Is the same thing white folk did when Black Americans got set free. They gave them reparations and rewarded them instead of giving it to us. So basically, all of our reparations should belong to us. They should never belong to white people. Talking about for their loss. It's the same thing. White Americans got paid for their loss. Okay, and now it seems like West African leaders, and I say that on purpose. It seems like West African leaders want to get paid by claiming a loss of the people they enslaved, of the people their forefathers enslaved purposely and sent off. Yeah, that right there, we've already been through this before over here in the United States of America, and that's why, and that's exactly why it doesn't sit right with Black Americans, because Black Americans tend to know a lot more history, and we know that white Americans got paid for their loss. Also, in Europe, the same thing happened. Europeans got paid for a loss of enslaved. So the same thing they're trying to do, these leaders over here are trying to do. That's what it seems like. Don't get mad at me. It's the truth. It looks like West African leaders are trying to get paid because of the loss of the enslaved that their forefathers captured. I'm dead serious. That's what it's like. That's what it looks like. I mean, somebody tell me something different. I don't know if I'm saying it right, because this is just off the top of the dome. But like, that's what it looks like. So you're trying to do the same thing. The white enslavers got paid. The freaking European enslavers got paid, and now the African enslavers want to get paid. Okay, the African enslavers shouldn't even get paid. What should go down? What should go down is that whatever reparations come through needs to go. If West Africa gets reparations from Europe, it does not need to go to the leadership, because we know that's a generational thing. That's like you inherit the throne, and you inherit the throne a lot of times. Right now, screw that. No, you go down there and you give it to the folks that you know, because you do know. That's facts. You do know. It's a lot of the people who not rich and who not in those. It's a lot of them people that didn't get it. Bypass that whole leadership thing because you're doing the same thing and you're trying to work away. It's a workaround. All I see is these leaders in Europe and everywhere else trying to work around actually giving the reparations to who deserves reparations. Trying to say, okay, we're gonna help. No, you're not. What you're gonna do is you're gonna try and come over here because white America for the longest time did not want to do it. So they got African leaders over here. Okay, so what we're gonna do is you're going to. This is what it looks like to me. You're going to say that symbolically, Black Americans are yours. Okay. So then when we do the reparations, these are all leaders. We're gonna get it, and nobody else gonna get anything anyway. Because when have they stopped working together? They haven't. When have African leaders stopped working with European leaders? They haven't. When has it stopped? It hasn't. Y'all don't see the United Nations over there? They're just trying to figure out a way to not let everybody get paid. And they're trying to figure out a way so the leaders, again, get benefit. That's what's full of crap. Like, don't try and touch Black American reparations. Now, if the Caribbean want to let y'all touch it, that's fine. If Brazil didn't want to let y'all touch it, that's fine. Y'all can split it up like that. But let Black American reparations be Black American reparations. Because Black American reparations, we have seen this before.
For over 150 years, foundational Black Americans have been fighting for reparations. This is not a new conversation. This is not a trend. This is not something that just started on social media. This fight goes all the way back to the end of slavery in 1865. Right after emancipation, our ancestors were promised 40 acres and a mule. That promise represented more than land. It represented justice, economic footing, and a chance to build generational wealth after centuries of unpaid labor. But that promise was never fulfilled. Instead, it was revoked, and we were pushed into systems like sharecropping, black codes, and later Jim Crow, systems designed to keep us economically trapped. Since then, we have consistently demanded repair. From early leaders like Callie House and the National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief Association in the late 1800s, to movements in the 20th century, to modern legislative efforts like H.R. 40, our people have stayed committed to this cause. This is a uniquely American debt owed to a specific people, the descendants of enslaved Africans in the United States. Now fast forward to today. A new generation is waking up. Younger foundational Black Americans are picking up the torch, educating themselves, organizing, and pushing this issue into mainstream political and economic conversations. We are seeing more clarity, more research, and more unity around what reparations actually mean, targeted justice for a specific historical harm. But with that progress comes a challenge. We are now seeing increasing attempts to broaden, dilute, or redirect the conversation. There are voices, particularly from outside the lineage of U.S. slavery, who are attempting to attach themselves to this claim. Let's be clear, reparations are not about general Black suffering worldwide. They are about a specific, documented harm carried out by the United States government and institutions against a specific group of people, foundational Black Americans. This includes 250-plus years of chattel slavery, nearly 100 years of Jim Crow segregation redlining, housing discrimination, and exclusion from wealth-building programs, mass incarceration, and systemic economic exclusion. This is a lineage-based claim, not a race-based handout. And here's where the conversation gets even more uncomfortable, but necessary. History shows that the transatlantic slave trade was not carried out by Europeans alone. Certain West African tribal leaders and intermediaries played roles in capturing and selling people into slavery. That does not remove the primary responsibility of Western nations, but it does complicate the idea that everyone of African descent shares the same historical position in this specific claim. So, when we see individuals from African or Caribbean nations attempting to position themselves within U.S. reparations frameworks, it raises legitimate questions. Every group has the right to pursue justice, but it must be directed appropriately. If there are claims for reparations in African nations, those claims should be made against the governments and systems responsible in those regions. If Caribbean nations are pursuing reparations, as many already are, those claims are being directed toward former colonial powers like Britain, France, and Spain. But the United States owes a debt to foundational Black Americans, and that debt cannot be redistributed, diluted, or redefined. Because when you broaden reparations to include everyone, you effectively erase the very people the policy was meant to repair. That's why many of us are pushing back now more than ever. This is not about division. It's about precision. It's about ensuring that justice is not turned into a vague concept that benefits everyone a little, instead of repairing those who were harmed the most. And let's also be honest. This pushback is happening because foundational Black Americans are becoming more informed. We are studying policy. We are understanding lineage. We are demanding data-backed, targeted solutions. This is a new era. We are no longer accepting symbolic gestures, broad diversity programs, or policies that lump us into categories that erase our unique history. Reparations must be lineage-based, data-driven, specifically tied to U.S. governmental harm. Anything less is not reparations, it's distraction. At the same time, we must stay disciplined. The goal is not to attack other groups, but to protect the integrity of the claim. Because once the definition is lost, the outcome is lost. And the truth is, this moment is different. For the first time in generations, the conversation around reparations is gaining serious traction. In academia, in politics, and in public discourse. Cities and states are beginning to explore frameworks. Research is being compiled. Economic models are being discussed. But with visibility comes resistance, and sometimes redirection. That's why we must stay focused. Because this is not just about money. This is about repair. This is about acknowledgement. This is about closing a wealth gap that was intentionally created. And most importantly, this is about justice that is long overdue. We've been fighting since the end of slavery. And now that a new generation is stepping up, the mission is clear. Protect the claim. Define the lineage. Demand the debt be paid. Because this time, we're not letting it be taken off the table again. Tell me what you think about this topic. Hope you find the information in this video informative. Feel free to like, subscribe, share, comment. Thanks for watching.